Our next talk on the agenda will be presented to you by Max Pronko. For over 15 years, Max has led the development of cutting-edge solutions with Adobe Commerce and Magento, catering for Fortune 500 companies. He was named a top Magento contributor for 3 consecutive years and a Magento Master in 2020. He excels in mastering intricate Magento challenges and shares his expertise on his YouTube channel. Please welcome Max Pronko.
Hello guys, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for your time sitting, and if you would like to understand test-driven development, so this is the right chance. So in today's presentation, I would like to do 2 things. First, I would like you to go from this topic and start implementing test-driven development in your teams. And second, I will try to use this nice button. I would like you to win a free online course. So if you would like to participate during this presentation, what you need to do, you need to take pictures of this presentation, tweet your pictures with the hashtag MM24UK on Twitter or x.com, and make sure to follow Max Pronko. This is my handle. So let's go to the agenda. We will discuss what is test-driven development. We will talk about some pitfalls of TDD and how to benefit from TDD. This is about me. So test-driven development, according to Wikipedia, is the way of writing code by first writing a test or unit test that fails if you would like to implement some scenario, and write just enough code to pass the test and then refactor. So long story short, the idea behind test-driven development is to write a test before you create a single line of code. There is a mantra, TDD mantra, says red-green refactor, and it says basically whatever was on the previous slide. You write a test that fails for the scenario you haven't implemented. You implement just enough code to pass your single test, and then you refactor your production code and your test case in order to meet acceptance criteria. Here is a small example of a unit test. So basically, we instantiate an object, and we test this object by triggering some method and asserting some output. So what is required for test-driven development? Basically, it's a very simple way of having this practice applied for your Magento teams. All you need is just PHP unit library or any other XUnit library or whatever library you can use. But in Magento application, you can benefit from PHP unit and PHP unit XML configuration file. I've seen lots of Magento 2 projects with composer.json file with empty required dev section, meaning that there is no PHP unit library installed at all. So if you would like to start using or applying TDD, what you need to do, you have to run composer require PHP unit into dev section of your composer.json. It's on Magento 2 project level, or you can install this PHP unit on a Magento 2 extension level. Usually, this is what I do. You can generate configuration, PHP unit XML configuration, by running this command, -- generate -configuration, and finally, you can create a directory where you will place your first, in this case, it's unit test. And let's have a look how we can basically follow test-driven development by example. So first thing first, we don't have any source code implemented. We have empty Magento 2 extension, apart probably maybe registration PHP and module XML. We would like to write some class, a service. In this case, it's pop-up service. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create a pop-up service test and a test method called test_is_active. Because I would like to implement isActive method that is part of pop-up service class. And the only line of code I'm going to do in that method is instantiation of this class or object that I'm going to test. Single line of code. And I'm going to execute this test by running PHP unit executable with -c PHP unit. I'm saying PHP storm. Probably I'm spending lots of time in PHP storm. PHP unit.xml file. So you can run your tests, single test. And as we can see, we have an error. It's basically a fatal error that class does not exist. And this is what has to be done in order to follow test-driven development. You don't have any class, you write a test. And with this information, you can say basically it's some sort of compilation issue. You don't have a class and it fails. And first thing you need to do, you have to fix this compilation issue. And what you can do, you can create a class, pop-up service, in the same PHP file where you have pop-up service test. I will explain later why I'm doing this, or I will refactor later. So the minimum step I need to do is to create this class. And the minimum step is basically creating in the exact same PHP file so I can rerun the test and I can see a different test result. And in my case, it says that I don't have any assertions. So from the fatal error that class does not exist, I have this test didn't perform any assertions. So it's a result. I can rewrite the test, and this is my next step. I'm adding one line of code, and I would like to implement isActive method, and I would like to assert that this isActive method returns false. It's a default state of this method. I run test again. I see that I don't have this method, obviously, because I haven't implemented it. And I write just enough code to pass my test. So I add this public function isActive and just return false. Obviously, this false is a hard-coded return value, and this has to be refactored. But it's not a topic of my current test. For my current test, what I want to do is to pass my test. So since I added minimum code, I can rerun the test and see that my test has successfully shows that I implemented my change or my method. What next? I would like to use active method to return true. What I will do, I will create a new test case that is going to be called test is active true. And I will instantiate new instance pop-up service and will pass true as a value. And I would expect that is active will return true. Obviously, when I will run this test, it will fail and will say that failed asserting that false is true because I haven't changed anything. And it's time for me to change my source code in order to pass the test. What I'm going to do, I will create a construct method. I will pass a isActive argument and will refactor my isActive method in order to use this class parameter. In this way, I can pass two of my test cases. And since I have two test cases that shows green result, I can go ahead and refactor my code. Remember that I created pop-up service in the exact same PHP file, so it's now time for me to refactor and move that file or class pop-up service from test unit directory location to the service directory. And I can update my namespace for my pop-up service test. And again, I have to rerun my existing test. So I can move further with my refactoring and confirm that my previous small steps that I performed, moving the class, didn't fail any existing test. Also, I can refactor my unit test and can introduce a setup method that is responsible for instantiating an object, as well as refactoring one of the two test cases that I'm going to just reuse that object that I created for the pop-up service test. And I can rerun test. And as you can see, it shows success. And with these small steps, I can navigate to the implementing production scenarios or features that I would like to have in my Magento 2 extension. So let's think for a minute. And obviously, if you are a Magento developer, and probably all of you are Magento developers, you know that in Magento, usual approach of getting some, let's say, configuration values is by using some config class or something. Let's call it config interface. And with the help of get value and passing some path of the configuration, we can get data or configuration setting from XML file or from database. This is what I would like to do. I would like to introduce a new dependency, or let's call it new feature, to my pop-up service class. I will update my test, one of the two tests, and I will introduce a new dependency into my pop-up service. I will rerun this test. I will see that there is no such method as getValue. And obvious next step would be to write minimum code in order for this test to pass. And I create interface with a public method getValue. And if I will rerun, I see a different result. So you get the idea, right? That with the small incremental steps, you can achieve 100% of test coverage, and you can. This will allow you to write your source code or production code changes that you need to implement. And you think first about this scenario and then about how you are going to implement it. So by writing minimum code to pass the test, I update my construct argument with, instead of isActive, I'm going to use config, that is part of config interface, and I will update this method, and I will write a minimum amount of code in order for my test to succeed. However, there is a problem because I use setup method and two of my tests fail. So if I will refactor my test setup, I will use this mock for config interface, and it's super easy to introduce mocks or stubs for interfaces and pass this dependency into my pop-up service construct method and pass into one of the test cases some expectation. I can rerun the test, and I can see that there is return value must be of type bool, null returned, because one of the tests basically there is no expectation for the config in order to return something, true or false, but it returns null. That's why the test fails. And in order to change the situation, we need to update test, refactor test, in order to expect something different. And in this way, I can have successful green tests. But there is a problem. If I review the code, and you may know it when using scope config interface, you may notice that getValue, or during the code review, getValue can return mixed result. And our isActive method expects Boolean, and probably there is some change required for this method. And instead of me running and adding this Boolean casting, I have to go back to my unit test. I have to add another test case in order to cover this scenario that says if getValue method of the config dependency with the exact same argument will return something different, let's say 1, because in a database, in core config data, we can store 1 or integer instead of Boolean. We expect that it will return true. And it shows us this result, and only in this case, I can go back to my isActive method and add this bool casting into the test. And now I have 3 tests. I have fully covered pop-up service class, and all my scenarios are covered. So basically, it's the whole idea of test-driven development that can be visualized in this nice diagram. You have first stage, you write tests, you see the failed result, you implement functionality, and only when you have all green tests, you can go and refactor code. And in this way, you do have some feedback when you are doing refactoring, whether it's extracting method, extracting variables, moving class from one place to another, and so on. What about Magento? Magento has test suites such as unit, integration tests, web API or functional tests, JavaScript tests, and functional Selenium tests. From my personal opinion, that all but functional tests that are Selenium qualifies for test-driven development. You need fast and instant feedback when writing new scenarios or implementing source code. So in terms of unit tests, I see lots of confusions. What's the difference between unit and integration tests? So the idea about unit tests that you test only one class, one method, without any external dependencies or anything that can instantiate, let's say, a new object or collaborator class that can work when you try to test as part of unit testing. There is documentation, Adobe Commerce documentation, that says unit test might be preferred, and there is a list of recommendations. Have few or no dependencies, do not interact with resources such as databases, can be covered by black box test, would not be easily foreseen to have dependencies in the future. All these recommendations are not about test-driven development. They're about the fact that you implemented class and then you go and write unit test. So integration test. Integration test is good when you would like to test two or more components, classes, methods, their collaboration, whether it's, let's say, a class and a database connection or some crude operations of models, resource models, and so on. It requires Magento 2 environment. So basically, whether you will use container or something to run integration tests. But with unit tests, and why I said at the beginning that I prefer having the PHP unit dependency inside my Magento 2 extension, that I can just run my unit test without any environments. Web API tests are great for creating tests. It's some sort of integration tests that can be used to test REST endpoints, GraphQL, SOAP, and controllers, Magento 2 controllers. Also requires running environment. Functional tests, so it's user interaction, and it allows you to test user interaction. So basically, you have Magento 2 application installed, you have Selenium server, you have feature implemented, let's say a form or a grid, and you would like to test this functionality without manual testing. And JavaScript tests, so it's some sort of integration test, but with the Hiva themes, I don't think that any one of us will be writing JavaScript tests. So in terms of testing pyramid, what we have, if we think about test-driven development, from the very bottom to top, we have to think about adding unit test, and if unit test doesn't work, we can go to integration test, and so on. So how about integration tests? Let's say we have a model that has this protected function construct, very famous method. And when we will write unit test, and it's basically impossible to write a unit test for a model, it will show runtime exception, object manager isn't initialized. In this case, there are some classes, legacy, that in this case, you can go ahead and add integration tests. So you use object manager from a test framework. You instantiate this new instance of a class, and then you can, for example, test CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations with the help of entity class that comes from a test framework. 10 pitfalls, or some pitfalls with test-driven development. It's bad when you skip a red-green refactor cycle if you will just run and build your hundreds of lines of code, and then you will think about writing some unit or integration test. You completely ignore the idea of writing tests before source code. Writing tests after the code, so basically you implement functionality and then you decide to cover your code with tests. Slow tests, it's applicable to integration, web, API, functional, but functional is outside of topic. So if you have some slow tests and the feedback is not instant, it would be hard to follow test-driven development practice, and it's hard to sell this idea to your teams on writing TDD, using TDD approach. Usage of Object Manager in unit tests. So back in Magento 2.1, 2.2, there was a recommendation to use Object Manager in unit tests. Now it's not, and you should never use Object Manager in unit test to instantiate object or unit under test. Lack of mocking and stubbing. So it's good to use PHP unit framework features like get mock builder, create mock, or creating real stub classes. If you have PHP functions, let's say fopen date or some global server or get or post variables, it's better to use interface and cover that PHP functions with interfaces and avoid using PHP functions in your code, so you can write and follow TDD, because with this fopen you wouldn't be able to abstract your unit under test. A good approach is to create and use interfaces over classes. So instead of having class dependency, it's better to use interface dependencies, so it's easier to mock and work with them. The law of the matter. It's a principle that suggests to talk to friends only, meaning that if you remember in Magento 1 era when you have match get model, get product, get price model, and so on, this chain of dependencies, it's not recommended even when you will think about mocking all these dependencies when following test-driven development. So only use get something from the objects that you receive from construct arguments, from arguments of current methods, and if you create these objects instantiate these objects in the method you have. It's interesting principle, I do not care. So every time you write test and you think that there is something that has to be implemented in this current class, you can just think I don't care. Introduce a dependency. Again, dependencies should be limited, like 2 or 3 dependencies per class. And you can think that that dependency is responsible for some additional algorithms that you would like to introduce into your current class. Benefits of test-driven development. Well, it saves time in the long run. Maybe when you will start applying test-driven development, it would be kind of, it would take days to try and follow this approach, but in the long run, it will reduce time for development. It will reduce bugs. It will have documentation in the source code, and so on. So I collected some test-driven development resources. Please use your phone to read this barcode. There are like books recommended this presentation with comments and videos and documentations that you can use, read, and watch in order to start practicing test-driven development in your teams. Thank you for your time.